2025 was my worst ever year in crypto, and my net worth dropped by over 9 figures. That is true. A lot of it was paper net worth. A lot of it was due to the price of super dropping. And as many of you know, I've never sold any of the super that I got by being a founder in the project. But as you know, I also hold a huge variety of altcoins that did pretty badly. And so today we're going to be looking at what I got wrong and how I'm going to get it right for 2026. The lessons learned, the scars, the good, the bad, and especially the ugly. Now, if you've had a frustrating year in crypto, this video is for you. One, to let you know you're not alone. But really the goal of this video is not to just look back in hindsight and say, hey, here's everything that went wrong. But the goal is really to learn something. Hey, what could we learn? How can we change? Insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And so the question now is, what behaviors must I change to be more successful in 2026? And I know I can already hear it. I can hear all the reply guys saying, stop betting on altcoins. That's a simplistic way to look at things. But the truth is that it's much more nuanced, and I think we can learn a whole lot more. So I spent the last few weeks compiling all my wins, all my losses, the lessons learned, and how I believe I should be looking at markets for 2026. And once again, I hope that by improving, I can not only serve you better, the audience, but I can do a lot better myself. So that is the goal, to make 2026 our year. And that starts by having a strong and brutal recap of what happened in 2025. I want to have a little note here. This video is as much for me as it is for everyone else. Doing this video is helping me iterate, become better. But also, the truth is that I have no pride here. Everybody knows I screwed up a lot this year, and I don't really care to be known as a crystal ball. The truth is that most influencers only show off their wins. I'm going to show off my losses in this case because I believe that there's a lot to be learned from what I did wrong in 2025. And my goal is to look back on this video in 1 year and be absolutely elated, be euphoric about how much better I did next year than I did in 2025. So with that said, let's dive in. First off, let's just be clear, 2025 was, in my opinion, the hardest year to be in crypto. You see, it was even harder than when I was truly dead broke in the bear market of 2018 and 19. I think back then it was just easy to hope to become something, but to have something so precious, so valuable, and to see it get destroyed systematically was almost unbearable. We saw every dream headline we could imagine coming into the Trump administration and just a systematic destruction of value. And then when I did end up flipping bearish, as prices fell below 80K back in April, well, I missed the flip back to bullish and everything ran back turbo and I was left chasing again. I felt like I was just getting chopped on both sides. Now, to be honest, I'm a very stubborn, very optimistic, and very driven person. And for the people who know me here or in real life, you'll know that I just simply don't give up on things very easily. That can be a very good trait as a founder, as a team leader, as someone who dreams of things that don't exist yet. But in markets, that can be very punishing if you are stubbornly attached to ideas that don't work out. In this case, I was very, very attached to the idea that alt season would be triggered cyclically along with the growth of Bitcoin. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, I'm not saying that I've given up on altcoins or alt season or anything like that. It's about understanding when they'll happen and sizing risk in proportion to those probabilities. More importantly, I think we've learned an absolute metric ton about what actually creates an alt season and specifically what doesn't. Those are the things that we're going to have at the forefront as to how we get better. But I want to be clear, this is not an I give up video. This is I've learned hard lessons and we're going to be much better video. With that said, let's dive in. First of all, the biggest lesson I think we've all learned here is don't fight the Fed. We learned after Jerome Powell single-handedly nuked crypto down to its knees, starting at the end of 2021, that the Federal Reserve monetary policy was very important when bidding on assets. The only problem is that in March of 2023, we saw an explosive growth in Bitcoin that totally broke the concept of us needing to wait for the Fed to lower interest rates to actually bid these assets. What we saw was that Bitcoin exploded upwards due to a bank collapse. And it was very clear that the Fed was willing at any moment to inject potentially trillions of dollars to save the banking system. And that fighting the Fed became a little bit of a confusing topic. Are they injecting liquidity? Are they not injecting liquidity? Should we expect a global recession? What's going to happen? Then we started riding the AI trade, and it seemed like monetary policy was not single-handedly able to keep risk assets down. It sort of felt like we were in a new era. But despite all that, we saw pretty much a systematic collapse of the altcoins versus Bitcoin over the past 4 years. And as you can see here, this is the altcoins divided by Bitcoin, excluding Ethereum and stablecoins. So really just the altcoins. And when you divide them by Bitcoin, you see that the value has pretty much gone down almost repeatedly for the past 4 years. Now, what I think is very helpful is understanding that when you look at the global liquidity, and that's this yellow line, and that's the global liquidity without the M2 money supply, just pretty much what the central banks are doing. And it shows you that effectively the global liquidity has been trending down, and so have our altcoins versus Bitcoin. This is a huge hint as to how the altcoins might perform in the future when this yellow line starts to durably go up. That is the biggest thing that we want to understand. We now see a lot of data showing that fighting the Fed, even though there were pockets, moments of outperformance, like at the end of 2023, where all the altcoins, meme coins, gaming coins, AI coins started ripping upwards, it felt like fighting the Fed was fine to do because everyone was making gazillions of dollars buying any of the trending alts. Well, in the end, we fought the Fed, but the Fed won. And so here we are at the end of what should have been a very bullish year for altcoins the year after the halving, and we see that monetary policy likely took away the speculative upside that crypto should have enjoyed. So that was mistake number one. We won't be fighting the Fed anymore, and luckily the Fed is currently pivoting to much more accommodative economic policies that should support risk assets, that should support, at the very least, some very good high quality altcoins. The second massive mistake I made was revenge trading perps. Yes, I started trading perps, and yes, I did become yet another statistic. I lost quite a bit of money, but I was able to fix that by sizing down on my trades and effectively risking less per trade so I could follow the actual goals of the trade instead of panicking over the numbers spinning. I'm sure everyone's done that. In the end, perps are a high skill game. I've made some good money once I sized down, but at the beginning, I was sized way too big. I was trying to make back the money that I had lost in the beginning of the year, and it was not the right path. So that was a big mistake I made, but I think there's a fundamental larger lesson there, which is trying to force things through on too short of a time period. And speaking of that, one of the biggest mistakes I made was actually trying to become a trencher or trying to buy into the meme coin trenching athletics of the early part of 2025 and the late part of 2024. Everyone who was in the trenches got absolutely obliterated. I'm not convinced there's anyone who's good at this. I certainly wasn't. And the ultimate blow off for me was the Libra token, which I bought into right as it dropped, thinking it was going to be a replay of the Trump coin. And I got pretty much vaporized for a significant sum of money. It was stupid. I shouldn't have done it. Obviously easy to beat myself up in retrospect, but it was one of my biggest losses. So we're talking about it here. Of course, as you know, all altcoins suffered repeatedly and continued to wind down throughout the year. I believed that the narratives would come back into play as soon as liquidity started to rotate. So marrying the cycle, marrying the altcoin cycle, and marrying the narrative playout of that altcoin cycle was where I definitely had some of my biggest losses. Effectively expecting for things that happened last time to happen this time, especially when it came to altcoin rotations. But what I really needed to do was actually separate long-term trades from short-term trades. Now, this is something that I'm going to be implementing very aggressively in 2026. We have long-term accumulation assets like Bitcoin, like Ethereum, like the S&P, like Tesla or Google, or something that is very likely going to be here and thriving and crushing it, not just months, but years from now. And then you have opportunistic trades. And if we're being honest, most altcoins are opportunistic trades. There are some that are durable. There are some that will stand the test of time, but that list is very small. Most of them should be treated as trades and not as holds. And I made no distinction when I was buying coins to myself or even to the audience as to what the goals of this trade were. And so when you have any trade, you must have hard invalidations for that trade. Going forward, any trade that is not a long-term accumulation must have an invalidation. If I'm buying something because it's just broken out or because it's hot or because it has some news coming, there must be a level by which I invalidate that trade on every single trade. Going forward, that will be the case. If I buy something, it will be expecting a certain result. And if that result doesn't play out, there will be a cut, and that will limit my losses so that going forward, there won't be any more huge drawdowns to the tune that we've seen in 2025. They will be, at worst, limited. If I had had hard invalidations, I would have cut things earlier during Q1, and I would have bought back earlier in Q2. I would have gotten more of the upside and less of the downside. I would have also cut trades in Q3 and 4 when the market started rolling over again. I would not have continued to hold, expecting for the mythical alt season to play out. Now, I want to be clear again, I'm not giving up on alts. I am not saying that there won't be alt season in 2026. In fact, there's a lot of very interesting forces coalescing that should bring tons of liquidity to markets and specifically more risky stuff in 2026. We will talk about that. I'm just trying to give you my lessons learned and how I'm adapting my style so that I can be a better trader first and a better content creator second. So here are the wins. I won on some meme coins. I won on Trump coin. I won on MOG. I bought that very early. Obviously, Super went 30x from the lows. Black Hole ended up breaking records for the amount of yield it produced for its holders and the amount of volume it created. The growth arc on Black Hole was some of the fastest and most aggressive we've seen ever in DeFi. So there were some major wins, but a lot of those wins got offset by even more major losses. When I look back at 25, I realize I'm much better at running teams, at shipping code, shipping products, and actually being an entrepreneur than I am at trading. But I also know that the audience really cares about having my voice out there in the trading ecosystem. So I'm doing my best to evolve and make sure I'm as good at trading and I'm growing as fast at trading as I am as a builder. Now, the next part is going to be the most interesting change for 2026. And that is that I need to shed my biases. You see, when I came into crypto, I wasn't a trader. I wasn't an economics expert. I had never really bought and sold equities. I just saw a new market exploding with value. And if you understood it, you could become filthy rich. That was all I understood, is that if you buy the right altcoins, you could crush it in life. Now, in reality, the market has evolved. And it's very clear over the past few years that being in crypto alone is not enough to be a modern investor. So I need to shed my biases. I need to shed my dogmatic view of the world and also incorporate other assets into my analysis, into my news cycle, and into my portfolio. Some of my biggest wins in 2025 have been over the last month as I forayed into precious metals and started to buy things that are having asymmetric breakouts in the stock market. For example, Rivian. By shedding my biases, understanding that exposure to crypto alone is far too seasonal and really just can't be forced timing-wise, I ended up winning. I stopped fighting against the boulder that wanted to roll down the hill, and I just bought stuff that was already going up. That goes very closely hand in hand with one of my biggest goals for 2026, which is not to be an altcoin fortune cookie, not to only just solely report news that reinforces my confirmation bias, not to just pick 100x coins or to ship the biggest protocol ever and talk about it. But my goal of the channel, I think, needs to shift very simply, pursuing truth, and specifically pursuing truth in markets. What is true? What is valuable? What is exploding with value? Because the more you stay focused on truth itself as the outcome, as the end goal, I believe successful trading is a natural byproduct of that. So instead of focusing just on alt seasons, when they're coming, when the liquidity is going to flow, stuff that's proven that it can disappear for a year or more at a time. Well, we're going to be focusing on what is pumping, what is exciting, where investors are putting their money and what it says about the markets. We are still very bullish about what's going to happen to crypto, to DeFi, to altcoins in general over the next few years. But that doesn't mean we need to be blind to everything else happening in the world. It's no secret that AI, robotics, space stocks, all that stuff has become very objectively more interesting to the investing public than altcoins and crypto. That's just the reality. It's supported by tons of data, both social data as well as investment data. Just look at the charts. So while we will dive further and further into crypto, while I am fully committed here and have most of my net worth tied up in crypto, I will be allocating to things like precious metals. I will be allocating to things like the AI trade. I will be allocating to things like robotics. I will be buying things like space stocks, and I will be looking to trade things that have asymmetric upside and really good looking charts. We're here to make money. And you know the saying, there's always a bull market somewhere. So let's make money together, wherever that bull market is. And I just want to keep reasserting this because I can see the comments, oh, Elliott's giving up on crypto. No, I think we're probably pretty close to the end of whatever crushing, soul-sucking altcoin destruction we've seen. It's been going on for a while, arguably for 4 years, but certainly for over a year since Q4 2024. I don't think that now is the time to capitulate. I do think that better times are ahead. I don't know if we go lower first. I don't know if it's in the second half of 2026 or if it starts in January, but I do think that better times are ahead of us and that they will come with more clear regulations, which is the other thing. When we looked at what we were so bullish for coming into the Trump administration, a lot of the actual excitement came from the government buying Bitcoin, which didn't happen, and clear regulations, which still haven't happened. So the exciting outputs, the things that are really net bullish here, actually haven't happened. Although we have seen less of a crackdown, that was definitely something that did happen. We've seen a major shift in policy and openness. We haven't seen the real floodgates open with clear regulation or the actual overt buying of Bitcoin by the government. Neither of those things actually happened. So it's important to just stay grounded in what we were expecting, why things were so explosive, and then why they cooled off. I don't think it's crazy. And again, as we stay rooted more in truth than emotion, that's when we'll find maybe where the markets are showing us things that we didn't want to see earlier. Now, returning to this, I think that it's very clear for 2026 that we know a lot more about altcoin season. We know about the liquidity, but we also know that we've seen historically low levels of social risk this cycle. And you can see that this social risk was much higher even in 2019. We saw social risk was at 31% or something thereabout. And we've seen since the Trump inauguration, pretty much social risk go to zero. It's very clear that social interest is what drives altcoin interest. It is a social phenomenon. That is something that we have to fully embrace as a reality, which is that if crypto as a whole is not exploding socially, if there's not new growth of users and excitement in crypto, it's very unlikely that the altcoin sector will be explosively growing. That is until we start seeing institutional adoption of DeFi, institutional adoption of other assets besides Bitcoin. Problem is, like I said, we haven't gotten clear regulations yet. So to see the institutional explosion, which by the way, as we've seen with Bitcoin, will look very different than retail explosion. Less emotional, more methodical, all pumps will get sold down and dumps will get bought back up. That is how institutions operate. So we genuinely need to see the growth again of social metrics. And that's part of what I want to do here is evolve the channel here, because the better our channel gets, the more we can contribute, the more growth we can have on the channel, the more we can contribute to the growth of crypto itself. I'm still extremely crypto native in asset allocation as well as spiritual allocation here. I've dedicated my life to this industry and I'm not going to see it just disappear from the conscience. But it's also important that we understand that trading crypto in a vacuum is probably not that smart. We need to understand how crypto relates to the AI trade, to the robotics trade, to the space trade, to all of the different types of narratives out there across the economic spectrum. And by delivering information that is contextual, we can actually grow crypto's share of that attention by tapping into those communities as well. Crypto's time will come back around, but it's important that we understand why it didn't in 2025 so we can identify as it's happening again at some time, hopefully very soon in the near future. And finally, 2025 was a very confusing year. Between Trump taking over, tariffs, conflicting and often chaotic economic conditions, a complete battle between the White House and the Federal Reserve, it's clear that when confusion reigns supreme, people buy the safe stuff, which is the biggest companies in the world or the biggest assets in the world, like gold. When in doubt, buy the safe stuff. That is a huge lesson from 2025 and one that we will look for in 2026 if we see total confusion once again. So in conclusion, 2025 was very brutal. I lost a significant sum of money. I got called a lot of names. And I know that above all, I feel like I let the audience down by being wrong. So for those of you who are still here, know that I'm very grateful for you to be watching this channel. And we're going to be working our butts off to do way better in 2026. We are taking stock of what happened, why it happened, and we're making new rules for how we trade and operate in 2026 and beyond. We're here to pursue truth and hopefully use those truths to make ourselves and our lives better off. We're here to better understand the world, and in doing so, build tremendous wealth. It felt like the game shifted below our feet in 2025, but now that time has passed with the power of hindsight, I believe that we can make better decisions and absolutely crush the game in 2026. So I'm not making any predictions for next year. I'm not saying, hey, for sure the market structure bill will be passed. I'm not saying, hey, for sure crypto is going to hit $200,000, $300,000. Even though I think it's very likely that Bitcoin makes new highs and altcoins do get their hallowed alt season rotation in 2026, I'm going to be fighting that voice inside that's eternally optimistic and wants to scream from the hilltops about how excited I am about the future and stay rooted in what we see in front of us, because I believe the alt season will be very, very obvious when it does arrive, and that even with these new rules, we will be very, very early to the trade when it does happen. That with these rules, we will end up protecting capital and becoming far wealthier together. And most of all, that I'll be able to deliver a huge amount of value to you for watching this channel. Anyway, thank you so much for bearing with me. Let's call this one a mulligan, and we'll be back and better than ever in the new year. As always, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you very soon on the next one.